We make decisions every day. But what do you do when you have those high stakes decisions that you don't want to get wrong? When you're faced with those types of odds, those that affect your future, your career, your identity, how can you be sure that the decision you make is the right one? I'm Rachel Charles, founder of Own Your Wings, and I help individuals and organizations make the difficult decisions that could threaten their stability, risk, and reputation. So let's have a chat. So when it comes to difficult decision making, there are so many different frameworks that you can go online and find. And sometimes we need a framework because, like it or not, when you've got a really difficult decision to make, we're not always led by logic. We're usually led by emotion. We think that we're doing the math. We think that we're weighing up the pros and cons. But many times, what our brain is actually doing is trying to find a shortcut to make the decision process easier. So when it comes to making those high stakes decisions around our future, our life, our identity, our reputation, we think we're making decisions for ourselves, but a lot of the times we are heavily influenced by others. For example, we can point to things that are similar to see whether it's going to work or not. And if it doesn't work, we see it as a visible symbol. We see it as loud, as something that's not going to work. And that's known as the availability heuristic. An example of how that can work is a friend might say to you, I had a really bad experience on this particular airline. When you're about to book your holiday and you see that particular airline come up, subconsciously, you're going to be thinking, I don't think I want to go on that one. And you're looking for alternatives. And if you don't find an alternative way to travel, you're going to embark on that trip expecting there to be a negative experience. And it doesn't always matter that there's hundreds of other people who may have had a positive experience. That one negative experience stands out and can sway our opinion. There's also confirmation bias. If we're afraid of something happening, then we subconsciously start scanning and collecting information that confirms that bias. And we will reject anything that challenges the bias. And again, we see that in everyday life. If we've heard something negative about someone or we've had a negative first impression, we would expect every other encounter with that person to be negative. And even if they do something just simple, it's easily interpreted to be the reason why they did that is because. Every piece of information is either accepted to confirm the negative viewpoint or it's rejected because it challenges our bias. And when it comes to decision making, it usually feels as if there's two roads. There's a road where everything great happens, and then there's the road where the not so great things happen. And we can experience what's known as loss aversion. If you're thinking about something as gaining or losing, we never want to lose. And even if we stand to gain, the thought of losing what we already have or changing our circumstances can start to feel quite painful. You'll hear people talk about the sacrifice or the struggle. Sometimes you have to have the short-term pain for the long-term gain. We don't like pain and we don't like loss. And so our decision making can easily be swayed into making that decision based on how much we stand to gain and how much we don't stand to lose. And that means that the decision can sometimes not be fully aligned with the path that we expected ourselves to be on. One of the other things that can skew our decision making process is when we look at other people and we take that as social proof. We always look to others to see what are they doing. Does their life look great? Does it look as if they're thriving? And if it does look great, we see that as confirmation they've done it. But we already know that just because we see it on the socials doesn't mean it's all true and doesn't mean it's all going great. And because it might be a thing that the crowd are doing and everybody's doing, that too doesn't make it correct. It might feel like everybody's leaving their job and everybody's jumping and starting their own business. And so now that must mean that it's the thing for you. And it might not be, the same way that it may look like everybody has done the same old thing. Go to university, get a good job and stay there until retirement. That might not be for you either. But sometimes when we're unsure about what we do look to other people and we take that as validation for that must be the right thing. It's kind of like when you're walking down the street and you're trying to figure out where should I eat, and you see that there's a restaurant that's totally empty and then you see another one that's packed out. Where do you usually go? You go to the one that's packed out, right? Because if all of those people made the decision to go into that restaurant, then clearly that must be the one with the good food, right? Not always. When it comes to certainty and group behavior, they don't always go together. And we see that with things in the media as well. But this is where we need to be careful about our decision making because, as I said, the higher stakes, the more emotions are involved, and our brain is going to take a shortcut to get through it to figure it out. So, how about we look at decision making from a slightly different angle? What if there are no right decisions? And this was a conversation we had quite recently in our school community. We assume that there always has to be a correct choice, kind of like a multiple choice exam. And rather than there be separate scenarios where you can have a different outcome based on whichever choice you make, we can sit in paralysis trying to find the exact right answer. And what we can do is start outsourcing the responsibility of making the decision to others, or we can even start feeling regret before we even make a choice. And the reason why this happens is not always because we're afraid of the outcome. It's because we're afraid that if we don't get the outcome we want, do we have the ability to set it right? Because when the stakes are high, when you're dealing with stuff that's to do with your income, your reputation, your family, your responsibility, if it goes wrong and it's affecting others, how are you going to deal with that? You'll be asking yourself, what does it say about me if I fail and make a decision that's so detrimental? And it's those questions that make decision making so difficult. So let's focus on your ability right now, your skills, your experience. If you were faced with a challenge, just an everyday challenge, would you be able to find an alternative or a way around it? If the stakes were lower than what you're addressing right now, would you be able to make a decision? And most importantly, in your experience, do you think that there is more than one way out of a sticky situation? If you answer yes to those questions, then you will realize that there is usually more than one right decision. What we have are multiple paths, but each path might have a trade-off. Each path will have its pros and cons. Each path will cause you to have to adapt. There are no right and wrongs. None of them will be perfect. But many times we sit in decision limbo and we just feel stuck. We're thinking about changing careers. We're thinking about moving houses and how it's going to affect the people around us. These are big decisions. And when your mind is overloaded, what we need to start doing is asking better questions rather than trying to find the right answers. Because we think that we need to make a decision to either go right or go left, but staying stuck is also a decision. And so some of the better questions that we can be asking ourselves are, how will I feel if I was in this same position a year from now? What am I actually protecting by not making a decision to move forward? If there was no perfect option, which one would I feel confident standing behind? What decision might the future me thank me for? If it doesn't work, how do I reverse it? And if this wasn't permanent, what small step could I try or test? All of those questions will give you the clarity you need to look at what your next steps could be and to push you forward. And what that does is give you data. Where you don't get data is by staying still. And there is always going to be fear when you're making a decision. But once you make a decision, then the alternative now becomes obsolete. You can't be sitting there thinking, oh, I should have. No, because you're not the same person who would have made that decision to go in the opposite way. And even if you think, oh, I should have gone the other way, you will never know what could have happened had you made that decision. And so questions like that aren't designed to get you to force a decision, but they are designed to stop you from outsourcing that decision to other people. It's designed to stop you pressuring yourself to make a decision that comes from a place other than alignment. So after you've done asking yourself those questions and you've got the clarity and you've got some honest answers, then you need to commit to trying or testing what your next step should be. There is that theory that says that clever people will take 72 hours before they take action. Sometimes you don't have 72 hours, but what 72 hours can do also is give you more reasons to not do the thing and find the negative biases that we know are floating around. So I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's something that you might want to think about. But what does help, especially when you're making high stakes decisions, is making some movements, some small steps so that you can start gaining data to see what actually works. It might mean that you're thinking about moving out of your career, Doesn't mean that you have to jump out of your job tomorrow or jump out of corporate totally and start a new business, but it can mean that you start exploring what part-time work might look like. It might mean that you take a sideways move so that you've got more brain space, more time, and less responsibilities. For example, when I was leaving corporate, one of the options that was offered to me was to take a sabbatical. That meant that if I ever wanted to come back, I would come back at the same grade that I was at with the same pay and benefits and not have to start again at the bottom of the rung. I weighed it up and it wasn't for me, but it would have been a really good move for somebody who wanted to test a move without having to move permanently, because it's always good to have something in your back pocket if you feel that you may have to jump back in times when it gets difficult. There's absolutely nothing wrong with, and it actually makes good sense to test a move with a safety net. The most important thing when it comes to decision making is to own it. You want to be prepared to review it when needed and to pivot and steer it in the direction that you want it to go in. The opposite of that is staying stuck and blaming bad advice for not moving forward. Fear can keep you stuck, but running through those questions that we spoke about earlier, and especially looking at how can I reverse this if it goes wrong, is going to help you to make decisions from a place of confidence. It's that understanding that there isn't a right or wrong, but how you handle the option you choose. So if you enjoyed this video, I suggest you look at my previous video on the hidden cost of staying stuck, because that too is a decision and one that can cost dearly. So until the next video, bye.